click the record button. Let me ask the Lord to watch over our time together and give us his favor. Father, we thank you again that we can come together. We thank you, Lord, that you've called us to be your sons and your daughters. And we just pray, Lord, that you'll just give us your wisdom today so that we can do what you want us to be doing. Father, you know all about the technologies here that can go up and down and work well and fail. And I just pray that you would watch over all this stuff for us. Just pray that you'll bring into the classroom those others that are maybe missing, Lord. Just pray your blessing and your health and your direction for each of us as we are seeking just to do what you want us to be doing in the various places that you've located us in your world. And we pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, for the sake of time, we're going to get rolling. I think we've kind of introduced ourselves. As people come back into the classroom, I guess we will ask them to identify themselves. But let me just share my screen for a moment. Let's see. We got two Robs. Hey, Rob Murray. Good to have you on.
Hold on.
Let's see, we've got Rob Murray in Tennessee, and then we got Robbie in Virginia. Is that right? Okay, wait a minute. We lost, let's see.
And you got me?
We've got you, Rob.
I cut off my phone and I'm back to my computer. That's all.
Oh, great. Okay.
I just keep you guessing.
Oh, I see. Okay. We got two Robs in the class, so I thought the other Rob had joined us, but
yeah, that one's
not.
left. It's my split personality.
Yeah, we've got another Rob in Virginia. So,
gotcha.
So I'm going to call.
The other Rob, it's not a Rob, it's Robbie.
Okay, Robbie.
Yes.
I'm going to do a long E on there so it'll remind me.
It's Robbie.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so Robbie. And with the accent on E, I wonder, Robbie or Robbie? We will ask him when he gets in.
No, it's a female.
Okay. So we'll have to ask her. Does she pronounce her name Robbie or Robbie? Depends on where you put the accent. All right, we are recording. Let me just share my screen for a minute. Let's see, I'll share this one. Hold on a second. Okay, I just made a few housekeeping notes just so you see them. I can see I thought I updated this slide, but I didn't. I notice I still have your course papers are due December. That's obviously wrong. You don't have a whole year to finish out your papers. But anyway, let me just kind of work through this slide a minute. For this is the research methodology course, which is preparing you to work on a proposal for your dissertation. You've hopefully done a lot of pre-reading that we put in the syllabus, just so you don't have to do all that reading each week. If you haven't done that reading, then of course you'll have to do all that reading. And I have tried to categorize that reading each in the weekly assignment areas, just so you'll know kind of the areas that we're dealing with that particular week. We'll be doing a Zoom room every week on Mondays. If you miss a Zoom room, I need you to just send me a paragraph kind of summarizing the highlights after you look at the video. That way I can give you credit for the Zoom room. We, of course, like any other courses, we have weekly discussion forums. We need you to participate in that. Dr. Henry will probably watch over that part of the course. We need your initial response by Wednesday of a week, which then gives time for everybody to kind of respond and kind of have some conversations on the topics for the week. So please really work at doing that. Since this is a small class, right now we've got about 6 people here, it's really important that everyone be participating in that discussion, just so people have other people to talk with. I would ask you to look at the grading criteria, which is on, it used to be called the info page. Now Populi has changed some of their menu items. There's a menu item called Files, F-I-L-E-S, where you will find a lot of the files that are relevant to all the weeks rather than just in any particular week. So you will find a document there, and I think it's just listed as discussion criteria or something like that. Anyway, I'd like you to make sure you look at that so that you know how you're being graded for a discussion. We try to use these rubrics, as they're called, so that we all know, what the ground rules are and what kind of criteria we're using. So we have a criteria that we will use to, grade discussions, and then we have a criteria that we use to look at the proposal and make sure that everything is included there that we need. Weekly assignments will have generally a weekly written assignment. For the first couple of weeks, you're really focusing on some literature issues. This week, we were having you look at 2 empirical research articles. Not everyone is accustomed to working with what we call empirical research articles, which are different than, say, articles that are, you can have articles that are historical, you can have articles that are providing, philosophy models of research. But an empirical research article is actually dealing with some kind of a study that someone has done and has reported on it. And so, since that's somewhat what you're doing in a dissertation, we would like you to at least look at a few of those empirical research articles and begin to just learn to analyze those articles so that you know what are some of the main components, because you'll be dealing with some of those same kinds of components, the problems, statement, the purpose. What do you think are the research questions that were being addressed in that research article? Sometimes they're specifically stated, sometimes they're not. And then, what was the methodology that was used in that research study? And then just give a little summary of the findings. So you'll be doing that this week, and hopefully you'll also get practice, if you haven't already done so, using our online BGU library. There you can get into ProQuest, which is, of course, one of the popular academic databases, or you can use Google Scholar. And you can get to Google Scholar either through the Populi, through our library, or you can actually just go to Google Scholar yourself on a web browser. A lot of people are using Google Scholars these days, and it's a good database. So you could use either one of those, whichever one maybe you're most familiar with. But anyway, you're looking for 2 empirical research articles this week, and then you're going to kind of write possibly a 1-page analysis of that article, those articles. So that's the assignment this week. For most of the weeks of the course, you'll be working on some section of the actual proposal. You'll start working on the problem statement, the purpose statement. You'll send those in, give you feedback, and you'll just kind of work through that process throughout the course. Let's see. Other weeks use the template to develop proposal sections each week. We do have a template that I do want you to submit your weekly assignments on. The idea is that you'll keep, each week you'll fill in a little more of that template and then upload it. And then I or Dr. Henry, we can give you feedback on what you've done. And then hopefully, you can keep doing revisions and work through that process. I think as Dr. Henry will say in a minute, you do a lot of revising when you're working on a research project, in the proposal especially. And that's okay. And that's how you learn that way, you get practice, and you're improving that proposal as you go along. I'm doing a little bit of work on that template today and tomorrow, so it won't actually be in the classroom probably. You won't need it this week anyway, but I'm doing a little bit of revising of a few sections, and then it should be up in the classroom within another week. That template will be. Let's see. Final project, of course, will be for this final project proposal. That'll kind of be the main part of the final course paper for this. And actually, the course paper is due not December 22nd, but it's due, I think it's the end of March, March 31st. Maybe I'll just type that in here. I guess it allows me. Okay, so that's March 31st. After you finish the course, you'll have a proposal. Dr. Henry and I will give you feedback on that final proposal draft. You can then make, revisions, and then you will send that proposal by email, generally, to a dissertation supervisor who hopefully you will have selected by the end of this course. That supervisor may have some other recommendations for you on your proposal. Once you have that proposal, you finish the course, you'll have a grade, but you'll keep working on that proposal with your supervisor, and then you'll submit that proposal, I guess, to me again. I've got a committee called a Dissertation Advisory Committee that's part of the academic cabinet. We look at that proposal. If everything looks good, we'll give you an approval. If we think there's still a few more things you need to work on that, we'll tell you, make this, do that, and then we can approve this, and then you would move forward with your proposal. There's one other committee that needs to sometimes look at most proposals, and that's our Institutional Review Board, IRB. Technically, the Institutional Review Board looks at any research that's dealing with it's human research. That's, of course, that's what the Institutional Review Board is all about. We're under guidelines from in the United States under the Department of Health and Human Services, and so we do need to submit all of our research to our committee, and we will look at that and make sure that you've got protection in place for the people that would be involved in your research. There's two specific areas that are that actually fall under those guidelines very specifically. One is called vulnerable populations. And of course, quite a bit of the research that we do in our school are dealing with vulnerable populations, because even people that are in poor kinds of community situations, they are considered vulnerable. Minors, of course, 18 and under, they considered vulnerable populations. There's a whole list that I can give you later. The other issue is called sensitive topics, and even religion is called a sensitive topic. So as you look at the two major criteria for proposals that must go to our Institutional Review Board for approval, it covers quite a bit of our research. So it looks like probably 80–90% of our proposals do end up going to our IRB, so that we as a committee there can look at it and make sure that it's abiding by the regulations for protection of people's privacy, and several other criteria that we use to evaluate research that's going to be done. Any questions on any of those issues? Okay. I'm going to stop sharing then. And Dr. Henry is going to lead us through some thoughts on just the whole concept of what is research. We just think that's probably a good introduction to this course. So I'm going to turn the session over to Dr. Henry, and we'll kind of work through some of those ideas together. Go ahead, Dr. Henry.
Okay, I'll share my screen eventually. Just some preliminary statements. Most times when students think of research, you're basically thinking of going to the library and getting information that you're going to use to write a paper. However, the kind of research that we're looking at is more demanding. And so I like to start off by explaining to students the kinds of demands that are made on you when you do the research that you're going to be doing for your doctoral paper, so that you could start to develop the mindset of a researcher. The initial shock that students get in a class like this is that your work is going to be sent back to you with a lot of comments, and basically we'll be saying to you, you need to write this over. In your other classes, when you do a paper, you do the paper, you cite your sources, you submit it, and you get a grade. That's not the process in a research class. And going forward, that will not be the process for the dissertation. You will be rewriting. And you will be rewriting several times. And for many people, that part of the research process is very unnerving, because when you write something and you get it returned to you with lots of marks on it, your initial reaction is, I didn't do it right. Well, perhaps you didn't do it right, but it's more than that. Research demands a certain kind of thinking, reasoning, and writing that is not used regularly in your other writing classes. So I just want to prepare you for the rewriting process. The other piece that we are very careful about, which you may not have had that experience in your other classes, is the issue of documentation. The documentation style for this class is the APA 6th edition. If you've been paying attention to your academic news, APA has just put out a 7th edition that was put out in October. But at this point in time, we are going to be using APA 6th edition. My experience is that very few students know how to document in the APA style. In this class, we are going to expect you to do that, and we're going to grade for your use of the APA documentation style. And I want to say this because what happens is that if you are not practicing documentation properly, and in our context, it's doing APA, when you come to the end of the process, you are going to have to pay. You're going to have to pay an editor to clean up your document. And I can tell you, there are different levels of editing. There is editing for content, there's editing for writing style, and then there's editing for APA documentation. And every one of them is demanding. Most of our editors are able to do all three together, but it takes time, it's tedious, and it will cost you. So the more experienced you are at using APA correctly, the less you are going to have to pay an editor. I would like to recommend, if you do not yet have a help in terms of writing style, that in addition to using the word editing, there is Grammarly that you can use, and there are other helps that you can use. But you definitely have to pay attention to documentation and your writing style. And but what I'm finding from our students is that very few students know the basics of APA. And that gets very frustrating when you have to write a dissertation. We expect you to use sources. That's very important, because as we will see, as we look at what is research, research is built on the work of others. Many times when we start to think in terms of research and what we want to study, we often think that what we want to study is unique and nobody else has done that research. It doesn't take you long to know that that is not a correct statement. You just have to Google a phrase or a variable, and you see in seconds thousands of articles, and I'm talking now research articles, peer-reviewed articles. We'll talk more about that, that have addressed your topic. So then you are not recreating the wheel, but you're building on what others have done. So it's important that you use the peer-reviewed research articles as a basis for developing the research that you are going to be doing. Those are some preliminary points I want to make before, and now I will do the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation on what is research, and give you an opportunity to interact and ask questions. But before I do the PowerPoint presentation, I just have one question. Has any of you ever done research before? Like I said, not writing a paper, but you've done a research study. It could have been a survey or an interview, or you did a study to address a particular issue in your workplace or in your ministry. Has any of you done that?
This is Michelle Dunlap. Yes, I have.
Okay, tell us a little about what you have done, Michelle.
In my master's thesis and also in my nonprofit and NGO work, lots of community assessments, focus group, context methodology, all different levels of stratifications of different types of research tools. But in doing that, it was guided research as well, with the assistance of professors, of course, and researchers, other research assistants as well. And so it's a very in-depth process, which I do know, and it's very time-consuming, and it takes a lot of patience.
Thank you.
And well thought through ideas and not rushed.
Thank you. I appreciate that input. Okay, let me share my screen and the PowerPoint presentation on what is research. Okay, this is not created by me, so you have the name of the creator here. Just illustrating the importance of citing your sources. So what is research? Let me use the slide. The systematic investigation into the study of materials, sources, etc., in order to establish facts and to reach new conclusions. The operative word there is systematic. It's an endeavor to discover new or collate old facts by the scientific study of a subject or by a course of critical investigation. And that quotation comes from the Oxford Concise Dictionary. Research is what we do when we have a question or a problem we want to resolve. We may already think we know the answer to our question. We may think that the answer is obvious, common sense, but until we have subjected our problem to rigorous scientific scrutiny, and that's the phrase there that we want to pay attention to, our knowledge remains little more than guesswork or at best intuition. What is important about the research that you're about to embark on is that there is a recognized pattern that you need to follow regardless of what research you're going to be doing. There's a common pattern that we're all expected to follow. And in following that pattern, we are following a classical framework with respect to how we do and report research. So that skill set is important. And that's why I talked earlier about the importance of being clear about the documentation style that you're going to use and being faithful to it because of the rigor that is demanded of you in terms of reporting your research. I will stop, and if you want to, you can stop me to ask questions or make additional comments. We're continuing on what is research. The first priority, and this is the first order of any research, is the formulation of your question. Then figure out how you are going to answer the question. Now, the question formulation process and part of the research process is foundational. And it is not as simple as we assume it will be. So we go through a process, we work with you in terms of formulating the questions of your study, because that's the foundation on which your research is built. And depending on the type of research you're going to do, and there are basically 3 types of research: quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method. Mixed method being where you use both qualitative and quantitative methodology in your research. But depending on the type of research that you're going to do, having formulated your question, the next step is to formulate the hypotheses. The hypotheses comes out of the question, and the hypothesis is a statement of the relationship between key variables of your study. We'll talk more about that, but just giving you a quick overview. There's more on this on the presentation. But what I want to say to you to prepare you for the frustrations of the process is that question formulation is not as simple as we assume it should be. In fact, in some schools, you would take a whole course on formulating questions for a research project. That's how intense it is and how specific it is. So that when you get to that process, I want you not to feel frustrated or to give up because it's foundational. The point being, if your research question is poor, then you're starting off on a weak footing. So the skill set that you have to develop is to be able to ask the right questions. And there's a process to getting to the right questions. One of the ways in which you work to develop your own question is to look at what questions other researchers have addressed when they sought to study the issue that you're interested in. And it may be that you may use questions from other researchers, and of course, you give credit for the fact that it's not original with you, and that's okay. But that's one way to help you to formulate and refine the question that will be foundational to your study. So in doing that, you look at how have others answered the question and how does your proposal fit in with what others have done, and how will you know when you have answered the question. That's the process that we're going to be taking you through as we work with you to develop your proposal. I could stop here for any question or comment. I'm assuming everything is clear.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Classical scientific method. Research one of the phrase that you're going to see over and over again as you read about research is the emphasis on what is called the scientific method. And inherent in the scientific method is the expectation that you will be transparent in terms of the process that you're going to use to do your research. And in being transparent, you're also saying that if somebody else chooses to use that process, they should be able to come up with the same results. Now, that is a debatable point, but I'm just making that observation in terms of the scientific method. The point being is that research is not about being creative in the way that we think of creativity in the arts, in music, etc. There is creativity in research, but that creativity is bounded by the expectation that what your work you should be able to replicate your work following the same guidelines that you use to get to your study. So that's very important. Questions or comments on that? Just let me say the PowerPoint that I'm using here will be put into the course. So you will get a chance to review it for yourself. So you don't have to make notes, etc. Right. Okay. We start with some observation of some phenomenon. Coming into the class, is there any, share with us some issue or some concern that you have coming into the class that you think you could use for your research. Have we lost Michelle? Do you yet have any idea as to what you will do, or is this totally new? So, and if it is, that's fine. I'm not hearing from anybody.
Sorry, Dr. Henry, I'm not clear on the question.
My question is there a concern, an issue that you have in mind to address through your research? Is there a question, an issue that you have in mind?
I am wondering if organizations that invest in the at-home portion of their workforce have better results with their employees if they're investing in their kind of personal lives or resourcing their personal lives rather than just focusing on productivity at work.
A good question. Do organizations that invest in employees working from home, is that what you're talking about?
No, maybe just more the personal development of their employees on the home front. Most organizations invest in their employees to further productivity. But do organizations that invest in their employees for personal reasons, family, marriage, life, do they have a stronger culture? Do they have better outcomes? It's considering the whole human, not just the human at work, but also the human at home and work.
Okay. Let me throw out some ideas. I think that is a fascinating piece of research. Of course, you will refine it as we go along. But just by way of search, I hear you talk about organizational culture there. I hear you talk about organizations investing in the development of their employees. So those are two concepts I hear right away. And then I think I heard you mention profitability. Did you? Okay. Now, just off the top of my head, I would say that you are probably trying to look at the relationship between organizational culture, employee empowerment, and the organization's profitability. That's just what comes to my head right away when I think about it in terms of research. And that's the kind of thinking that you're required to bring to the process. So when I've identified, I think, 3 different variables, what I would do is just go to Google search, do a Google search and see what studies have been done linking organizational culture, empowering the employees, and profitability. And I'm sure you're going to find a lot. But that is, for me, that's a fascinating research project to think about. Kofi, let me hear from you.
Dr. Henry, I've still been thinking about my topic. I think I'm a bit clear about what I want to do with my organization and my life from 2020. So it's beginning to shape my thinking regarding my research topic. So I think in the next week or 2, I should be much clearer on it. But right now, it's not 100% clear, but I do have a better clarity from 2020 going forward, which should influence my research topic.
Okay, good. And let me just say, don't be surprised if your interest changes in the process. That's another area that I like to warn people about, because then sometimes people get frustrated because they come to the class, or in the initial stages, they may have a passion, a certain interest. And then as they read and as we discuss together in the class, you may find that your focus is shifting. That's quite okay. What is important is that we are clear about the foundation on which we're building for the research. So expect that there will be shift in interest, in focus, etc. And the shift will come in from several quarters. One area definitely that you will get a shift coming is as you read other people's research in your area of interest. And then you may find that your initial interest is changed or is shifted as a result of what you already see in the literature regarding that interest. So I just want to warn you about that. The hypothesis. The hypothesis is an important piece. And we talk about hypothesis if the study that we're doing is a quantitative study. We have qualitative, quantitative, mixed method study. At the heart of the quantitative research study, we are basically looking at relationships between variables. And we're going to use statistical measures to assess those relationships. That's at the heart of the quantitative study. And that is why we have to think in terms of hypotheses. We start with a question, and then we propose a hypothesis. And in terms of the hypothesis, we're proposing relationship between variables. If I could take Rob's topic again, let me see if I could remember everything. I didn't write it down, and he will help me. We talked about, go ahead, Rob.
I was going to help you. The organizational culture, personal empowerment, and the organizational profitability.
Good, perfect. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're proposing that there's a relationship between these three variables. We don't know yet what that relationship is. But in terms of a hypothesis would be a statement that proposes the relationship between these three variables that we're going to measure in this study. So for example, we could propose that, and I think you said it actually, I'm not saying anything that you haven't said. An organization whose culture is includes the personal development or the personal empowerment of its employees is likely to be a profitable organization. Does that make sense to you? That is an example of a hypothesis. So in that statement of relationship, we're going to test the relationship between these three variables. Now, later we will have to decide, given the variables, which is the independent variable and which is the dependent variable. We'll have to make that decision, but that's what, just to illustrate what it looks like when we talk about developing a hypothesis. There's a student whom I'm supervising right now, and she has an elementary school, and she wanted to look at the relationship between three variables. She wanted to look at language skills, self-esteem, and the skills subject. Those three, to see what, for example, one of our hypotheses is that language skills will have a positive impact on students' self-esteem. So there you have two hypotheses. The language scale being the independent variable and the self-esteem being the dependent variable. So her study is built around that. And then the third variable that she addressed was the issue of what we call vocational education, skills education in the schools. So just give you an example to get you thinking. Welcome back, Michelle. I've just been asking you to give examples of interest that you have so that I could use them in illustrating the key topics in the presentation. Michelle?
I'm here.
Yes. Is there a specific interest that you have coming into this class?
There is. You would like for me to voice the whole thing?
Yes.
It's centered around innovation, development from a kingdom perspective. I know we use the word transformation and development, but it's more has to do with the cultural considerations around innovation and development.
Innovation and development. Okay, tell me a little bit more about how you're linking those.
Say that again, Claire. I'm in a public place.
Oh, okay, that's right. Okay, I was saying, if you could tell me how or what are you expecting in terms of linking those two that you mentioned?
The linking innovation and development and the cultural considerations and their impact on new design of new products, new services, and new community context.
Okay.
What does a future community look like?
Okay.
At the cross section of these three.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, I would suggest that you do a Google search, see what research has been done, linking those three.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on from hypotheses. Of course, we're going to say more about this as we go through the course. The hypothesis makes a prediction of the expected outcome in a given situation. And usually, we look at how the manipulation of the independent variable will influence the behavior of the dependent variable. In terms of Rob's example, organizational culture may be the independent variable. Personal empowerment may be the dependent variable, and profitability may also be a dependent variable. What do you say, Rob?
I don't know what I say. I'm just like,
Okay, I'm throwing you into the deep end. I'm sorry.
I like it.
Okay.
Oh, it's so good.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm trying to make a question of what we're talking about. Does this? I'm not trying to get my question right. I have not put any thought into this.
Sure.
But maybe what I'm really wanting to know is, are organizations who are investing in the personal development of their employees, are those organizations more profitable, and do they have a stronger organizational culture?
Very good question.
So the question is, are organizations who invest in the personal development of employees, okay, so I would imagine that's the independent variable?
The personal development of the employee, I would say that is the dependent variable.
Okay, that's the dependent.
But, sorry, let me just say one thing for everybody. A variable can be either dependent or independent, depending on how you define it. No variable is inherently one quality or the other. It is the way you define it and the way you choose to use it will decide whether it's independent or dependent.
Okay.
Right, good.
Let me make one comment there too.
Sure.
You were saying, as this slide says, we're talking about the manipulation of an independent variable. So if you were looking at these, let's look at these topics we just talked about in your case: employee empowerment, organizational culture, profitability of the organization. If you look at those, which one of those would you want to try to manipulate or change or improve that will then affect one of the other topics that you've thrown out there?
I think I want to the personal development, the empowerment. If we manipulate that one, does it improve the others?
Sounds good. Yeah, that would make sense to me.
Okay. So I've written down your question, Rob, and I think it's a good question. Are organizations who are invested in the personal development of employees more profitable?
Yeah.
Now let me confuse you a little.
I'm already confused, so maybe two negatives make a positive.
No, because you choose to use the term more profitable, you are going to be proposing now to make a comparison.
Gotcha.
Because but if you took out more, and you just use profitable, there's a difference. And that's the thing about research. Your language has to be precise and clear.
Yeah.
That's good. So you can do a study that looks at a comparison, because if you're going to talk about more profitable, then your study will have to look at more than one organization. And then what you would be also prior to the study, you may choose to select one that is quote unquote more profitable than the other, to see if that the source of the profitability is in a culture that empowers its employees. See what I'm getting at? So that's the kind of thing that you have to pay attention. You have to pay attention to your language, your word, and everything, because every word counts and matters.
That's good.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for allowing us to confuse you.
Hey, thank you.
Okay. Experiment. Now, one of the ways in which we test the hypothesis, and notice the word I use is test. In research language, you have to be very precise. And one of the things that we avoid using in research is to say that the purpose of the research is to prove something. Because if you say the purpose is to prove, then you are coming in with an answer that you already assume. And you're going to set up your research to get the answer that you expect. But that's not how we do research, or that's not the purpose of the research. The purpose of research is not to prove right or wrong. The purpose of research is to uncover and to discover new information, or to give clarity or understanding to issues that you have been dealing with, so that you come in with an open mind and you allow the research to develop and to give you an answer. Now, at the end of the day, the answer may not be what you expected. In a good pursuit of knowledge, then the next question you may ask is, why isn't the answer what you expected? The hypothesis is, in a sense, a statement of expectation. That's what it is. Now, you do an experiment to test the hypothesis. And at the end of the day, the experiment may dismiss your hypothesis. It doesn't mean that your research is any less than. It just means that you probably have to dig more and ask some more questions. Okay. So when you use an experiment is one way in which you test a hypothesis. It's not the only way. If the experiment works, the hypothesis is shown to be probably correct, but you can't prove it to be 100% true. If it fails, it could be because the hypothesis is wrong. That is, your statement of the relationship between the variables is wrong, or it may mean that the experimental design that you use is faulty. You see? So those are some of the explanations.
Let me say one more thing, Mrs.
Sure.
Bill. I'm always trying to relate some of the concepts to the kind of work that we do at BGU. I'm gonna use you again, Rob, since we were already talking about your work. And one of the things we've always got to determine is, what is the best approach in terms of a research method for what you're trying to determine. Right now we're dealing very, very quite a bit with the quantitative approach, which is good. There's a whole nother side called qualitative, okay? And there's still debate, even within academic circles, if a qualitative approach is actually even valid, because some would say, it's too subjective, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the research. But if we were looking at BGU, when we look at a dissertation, we talk about the data gathering. You may look at several organizations, and you may design a questionnaire that would determine how much that organization has paid attention to, say, personal development of its employees. And then you may also include on that survey some questions about profitability. And let's use the term financial profitability, okay? And have they done any studies in terms of what more focus on personal development has possibly, how that's affected their bottom line financially, if they've done any studies on that. And that might be something that you would look at. Okay, if you did that in a survey, you're using a quantitative approach. You might have, true, false questions. You may have multiple choice questions, but it's still something you can quantify fairly easily. If you're going to do that in a qualitative approach, you may sit down face to face with some organizational leaders, and you may start looking for thoughts about, okay, what kinds of things have you done to actually affect the empowerment of your employees? That might become a whole discussion in an interview. Now you're probably approaching that topic from more of a qualitative approach, a little more subjectively. A mixed method is going to use both of those, okay? Like I said, we'll do more of this, but at BGU, we've got the data gathering side. Say if you're talking to organizational leaders, you're doing a survey, but then what we call is a transformational strategy. And what we try to emphasize in this class is that that strategy will need to grow out of your research. But that strategy, when we were talking about an experiment, it could be an experiment. You may choose to do something in an organization to experiment to see how does, by doing this in this organization, does that seem to improve the way the employees feel about that organization? Okay, that would be an experiment that you may try as a transformational strategy, okay? So I'm trying to think through some of these thoughts that we do in traditional research, experiments, hypotheses, research questions, and then we always have to try to apply those within the kind of context that we're working with here at BGU. And I'll keep, beating that drum as we go through the course. And you'll probably see too that Dr. Henry has really had really good extensive training in the quantitative approach. And so really depend on her knowledge on that. I will sometimes probably promote some of the qualitative work because I've seen more of that in the work that I've done here in my life work and BGU work. But so between the two of us, you're going to probably get I hope, a balance between how these two approaches work with each other. Enough said.
Okay, I just want to point out that my dissertation research is qualitative. It's a case study. So I've worked on both ends.
I forgot about that. That's right. You did do a qualitative study.
My dissertation is a qualitative study.
All right.
Okay, and I use Yin, and Yin is still the go-to theorist when it comes to developing this case study. He is still the leader in the field. Okay, so we've talked a little about the hypothesis, and we on this slide we're talking about the null hypothesis with respect to the experiment. The null hypothesis, which is usually written as H0, is that any observed changes in behavior are due to chance. The alternative hypothesis, H1, is that the hypothesis that you are trying to demonstrate. Usually the best you can do is to refute the null hypothesis. And when you do that, then you're showing that the alternate hypothesis is, notice the language of research, probably correct. We don't just say it is correct, we say it's probably correct with a measurable degree of likelihood. And there we move into what we call statistical significance. So in terms of the quantitative study, a piece that is important to doing a good quantitative study is you need to have some knowledge of basic statistical measures. one of the weaknesses of our current course is that we don't have a class, or we don't have a section on basic statistics. However, in the PhD program that is being launched now, we do have courses that we offer in statistics that any doctoral student could take any of those courses to help them with their research project. Just, mentioning that in passing. Where do hypotheses come from? Well, we've already demonstrated using Rob's example, but they don't usually come from thin air. They come from within a framework, some phenomena that is not well explained by current thinking. New hypothesis is often just an adaptation of an existing hypothesis. But the whole concept of the hypothesis and the hypothesis testing is germane to research, especially to quantitative research. And let me just mention that the hypothesis is also relative to the qualitative kind of research. And let me explain how that goes. What happens is, after you've done your qualitative study, you don't start off in the qualitative study proposing hypothesis. But after you have done your study, you may, as a result of the study, you may propose hypothesis, and then propose that further research needs to be done to test these hypotheses that comes out of your study. So the hypothesis is relevant to either the quantitative or the qualitative research. In the quantitative research, we start out with hypothesis because the hypothesis is what we're going to test. In the qualitative research, we end up with a proposed statement of hypothesis, and we say that future researchers should now move this along and test this relationship that our study seems to have uncovered. Does that make sense to you? Okay.
Yes.
And we talk here now about the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. The thesis is usually the original statement of an idea. The antithesis is an argument to challenge a previous thesis. And the synthesis looks at how we resolve and develop a new argument from the existing sources. Typically, the synthesis resolves the apparent contradiction between a thesis and an antithesis. Testability. We're still talking about hypotheses. And as we said earlier, the language we use is, we don't talk about proving the hypothesis. We talk about testing the hypothesis. So when we use that term testing, we're coming to the research with an open mind and being prepared to accept whatever results come from the research. And in general, research is not about proving anything. It's about asking questions, asking good questions that will help us to discover information that will explain phenomenon or predict a phenomenon. That's at the heart of research. It's not about proving anything. And that is why it's important that in research report, we are transparent about the method that we will use to collect the data and to interpret the data. Because we're not out to prove, we're out to discover. This now talks about the hypotheses and the one or two-tailed hypotheses. I'll stop here. The rest of the the PowerPoint would be in the course, but this is just to give you, and in so doing, I'm sure I'm glad I've set your wheels in motion. But that's what we want to do in the first class, to get you to start thinking in terms of what it is you are interested in. I'm fascinated by Rob's interest, and I'm just saying it may change, but it has potential for a manageable piece of research. Dr. Payne?
Okay. Let me just share my screen one more time here before we close, and I'm only going to take a couple minutes just to say a couple of things about APA, and then I'll probably devote a little more time to that issue in another session.
Okay.
There's a document that's in the files area, and I think it's called APA Writing -APA, etc. There's a sample document here from Purdue University, and I think we'll go through this probably another session, maybe the next time, just so you get some idea of use of APA. Say this week you're going to be analyzing the research articles. You still may use APA, okay, there. But when you get into putting together your proposal, I specifically want to make sure that you are looking and using the APA kinds of issues. The kind of issues that we're going to deal with, here's a quote: online education has grown at an exponential rate in the past few years, where, quote, and it gives a whole quote here. In this situation, we've put what we call the parenthetical citation or documentation at the end. Allen and Seaman, 2008 was the year that sourced the page. When you're doing what we call parenthetical citations, the crucial issue is that the reader can look at the first part of this citation, Allen and Seaman, and then that should then match an entry within the reference list. If I go to the end of this document, I should be able to find that that entry easily. There it is, right there, Allen, E, and Seaman. Okay. Sometimes students will have the problem where they'll list a source one way in the text, but then it's listed a different way in the reference list, which does the reader no good, right? The whole point of doing documentation is that the reader can then go to the reference list and easily find that that particular source. But there's at least two different ways that you're going to be doing this kind of documentation. We just looked at the first way here was, in this case, the citation was put at the end of the quotation, okay? So that's one standard way of doing an APA reference. A second way, though, is if you mention the authors within the paragraph, then the format is something like this: Sorez and Orozco, and we put the year of the source, explains it like this. Okay, in this case, we have the name of the authors used within the paragraph. So now the acceptable way is, right after that author's name, you put the year of the source. Okay, so it's a little different than over here. Over here, we didn't actually begin this sentence with these authors' names. We could have said Allen and Seaman, paragraph, parentheses, 2008, say, and then we could give their quote. Okay, but the author, and the author didn't choose to do it that way here. So in this case, the citation is at the end of the quotation. Again, though, in this case, where the author has mentioned the source author's name in the paragraph, Now the acceptable way is to put the year of the source immediately after that name and then go on with the sentence. And then at the end of the quotation, in this case, you put the page number of that quotation. And if you have a quotation, you must put a page number. If you're only giving more of a summary of a person's opinion, thought, etc., you're not required to put a page number, but it is a good idea. Okay, but you're not required. But you are required to put a page number if you have an exact quote. So that's just two ways that, and we'll get into this more when we go over this document more in detail. But you can look at this document ahead of time just to kind of get an idea at an APA document how that kind of documentation is being done. All right.
Dr. Penn, I just want to make one observation as we close off.
Go ahead.
With respect to documentation, one of the things you want to start this class with and be consistent in doing is making sure that you keep every source that you have read, you keep your information together. Because there's nothing more frustrating than coming to write a paper, quoting from individuals, losing the source that you use the quote from, and then having to go search to find those sources that you have documented in your paper. So what you want to do is to keep together in one folder, however you choose to do it, online or whatever, all the material that you're going to be using. So that when it comes to the final documentation, writing up that references page, you have all the information you need. The other thing about the APA references page is that you only put into the references sources that you have referred to in the body of the paper. So you don't put into your references work that you have not cited in the paper. That is important, okay? Just reminding you and
those are good thoughts. I think what we do, I think in our particular case of the proposal, we have the reference list, like as Dr. Henry has just said, which will include anything that you cited within that proposal. I then allow another list that would just say potential sources for your, for your dissertation. So when the academic cabinet or my committee looks at that, we can see what other kinds of sources you're thinking about that will be useful in your particular research. And so you'll have two lists actually. And so, we'll look at that in more in depth later. There is this week, like I say, you're working on the two empirical articles. Next week, you're going to start filling out a chart. As Dr. Henry said, it's really good to keep your sources in one place, and you can choose to do that. I just have one little chart that I've used and other people have used. It's kind of an Excel sheet where you just fill out the name of the source, the main thesis of that source, how you might use it, etc. And that way you can always look at that chart and kind of just have everything in one place. But everybody's going to kind of develop their own system of keeping track of their sources. That's just one way. All right, I do want to try to hold these sessions as much as possible to about 1 hour and 15 minutes because I know your time is valuable and some of you are at work, and so I am going to close off the session. Be working with each other in the discussion forum this week, and then working on these two empirical research articles will be, and all that's due by the end of on Saturday. It's kind of each week ends by Saturday, and then we start the new week on Sunday, is how the weekly work goes in these courses. All right, with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and we will be talking with you online in the course this week. And again, thanks for making the time to join us.
Okay.
Bye now.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.